The Void. I awoke recently from the depths of a pleasant dream. I lay there in my bed for a few moments, trying to remember the details, but after a while only a comforting glow remained. I opened my eyes, and it was still dark. I rolled over and noted that the streetlights, which would usually cast a beam of light through my blinds, were off. So too was the extension lead in the corner, whose tiny LED would otherwise be illuminating a small patch of skirting board next to my desk. I rubbed my eyes and squinted hard in the direction of the window. Nothing. Confused, I buried my head under the covers and thought about my plans for the day ahead. Nothing major, only meeting a few friends in town for lunch, but I was looking forward to it after a long week's work. I thought about the questions I'd asked Casey, who'd not long been married. I hadn't seen her for a year or two, and besides, the wedding had only been a low-key family affair, or so I'd gathered from the photos. I was curious to hear how Mark's new job was going. Last time I'd seen him, he was still a student. I'd yet to see his beard in the flesh, and I wondered if it would look as patchy and anemic in real life as it did online. I tried to imagine whether or not Ryan would put in an appearance, as his track record was decidedly ropey to say the least. I stopped. Was it weird that I hadn't been able to see anything just now? I sat up in bed and looked around. Not so much as a chink of light to be found anywhere. Not through the window, nor from under the door. Not from any electronic device or reflecting off any surface. I fumbled clumsily over to my right for the switch on my bedside lamp, but the table wasn't there, and the momentum of my body weight toppled me sideways out of the bed and onto the cold, hard floor. That's weird. My bedroom's carpeted. Why then had I landed on what felt like granite? I fumbled around in the dark for the lamp and, failing, stood up and reached over to where I approximated the switch by the door to be. But in front of me was only space. Empty space. I walked several meters beyond the plausible boundaries of my bedroom, feeling nothing but the smooth stone beneath me. I felt my heart racing in my chest from the disorientation, my hands clammy, and my feet cold. Stop, breathe, turn around, go back to the bed and start over. It may be that you rolled over in your sleep and have lost your bearings. I retraced my steps, leaning over slightly with my hands reaching down for the metal bed frame. Nothing. I continued my silent creeping in the dark. How could I have not reached the bed again by now? I turned to my left and took several strides, then to my right. I found that I'd lost all sense of direction. My confusion turning to panic, I began to walk forwards, briskly and purposefully, arms flailing around me in the hope of finding something, anything solid, other than the floor beneath me. In all directions, not an atom of solid matter was to be touched. After what I took to be several minutes of panicked searching, I began to jog, then run, blindly, so scared that I only hoped I would crash into a wall or fall into a hole, so that I might at least know that this emptiness had some form of boundaries. What the hell's going on? I croaked to myself. My voice, heavy from sleep, seemed more real than anything I was experiencing. Hello? I cried desperately. With no walls around me, the word had nothing to reflect off of, and so disappeared dryly into the ether. This is just a bad dream, I told myself. It's a nightmare. Lie down and fall asleep. I tried my best, but as I lay there terrified on the hard, icy floor, my body became so cold that I began to shiver. The longer I lay there, the more awake I felt myself becoming. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself, standing. I tried walking again, calling out as I went. Hello? I think I'm having a bad dream. Can someone help me? Just wake up, I said to myself, having abandoned all pretense at dignity. And I tried. First, I tried willing myself awake, then pinching myself, then slapping myself in the face, all to no avail. I started to cry, which turned rapidly into a wail. Help me, please, someone help me. I knelt down on the floor and banged my head against the granite, gently at first, then harder and harder. Curiously, I felt no pain, neither numbness nor dizziness, save for my general state of disorientation. The ceiling. Is there a ceiling? In my bedroom, I could touch it on tiptoes. I tried, but couldn't feel anything, despite stretching out my arm as far as it would go. Rapidly running out of ideas, and in sheer desperation, I jumped. But alas, there was nothing to be felt above me. Nor, for that matter, was there anything beneath me. I neither fell nor floated. The ground was simply gone. Only I was still there in the darkness. I stretched my legs downwards, trying to find the floor again. I swung myself upside down as though diving deep underwater. I tried to swim, but felt no movement, nor even the faintest sign of a rush of blood to the head. In all dimensions, I now found myself completely and hopelessly lost. As the minutes turned to hours, the horror of my situation began to set in. I couldn't see, I couldn't touch, and I was not going to wake up. I could feel the blood pumping through my veins, and the inevitable constant in-out of my breathing getting louder and louder as it seemed to resonate around my skull. It seemed to me I must be dead. Perhaps this was hell, or some form of it. The notion of an eternity in this state was so unthinkable, I rejected it outright. No. I must be here for a reason. Some form of torture, research, someone wants information from me. I'll tell you whatever you want to know, I said, but my voice was so loud that my head felt like it was going to split in two. Please, I'll do whatever you want, I whispered as quietly as I could. Just please, make it stop. I waited, searched around for some change in my environment. Nothing. And it was then that the most terrible thought occurred to me. That this place was no work of malevolent design at all, but something naturally occurring, with no logical reason for existing. It is so only because some natural law commands it, and there is no sentience, good or ill, to bear witness to this despair. Hours passed. I tried daydreaming. I closed my eyes and drifted into what I thought to be a horizontal position. I tried to rest, but to no avail. When so deprived of sensory stimulation, what discernible difference could there possibly be between being awake and being asleep? If this was some form of torture, then surely it would come to an end eventually, or else what would be its purpose? I slowed my breathing right down, counting every breath in cycles of 10. I tried to relax, to make some form of peace with my torment. But as I did so, I began to notice a numbness descend upon me. I could no longer feel my trousers against my skin. I touched my legs and felt nothing but inanimate flesh. And even as I did so, my arms too began to fade. I touched my face, and it felt as though it were another person's. The sensation, or lack thereof, gradually extended to my head, until I couldn't even tell whether or not my eyes were open. Only my thoughts confirmed that I was still alive, or still real at least. I felt as though I'd left reality altogether, and now only existed as some form of incorporeal entity. At least I could no longer feel my heartbeat resonating through my skull. I was alone with my thoughts, and finally able to dream. As I awoke from what felt like slumber, I could hear sounds, clinking and tapping like cutlery on crockery, and the faint sipping of a drink. "Hello?" I said. The sounds stopped. "Hello?" I repeated. After a few seconds, there came a tentative reply. Hello? The voice was soft and timid, and sounded as if it were simultaneously very close and a long way away. And then I could see her, a blurry splodge of white coming slowly into focus, as if seen through the lens of a camera. She was sat cross-legged, facing away from me, and at a tilted angle. Her ornate clothing was old-fashioned, a plain white dress and bonnet, polished shoes, and the blue ribbons in her long dark hair the only hint of colour in the unearthly tableau. She rotated to face me, or I did to face her, I couldn't tell, and I could see that she was a child of no more than 10. She stared wide-eyed at me. I couldn't tell whether she was frightened, horrified, or simply astonished. "Who are you?" she asked. "I was going to ask you the same question," I replied. "Where are we?" "We're in the void, of course," said the girl. "Would you like some tea?" It was only then that I noticed the array of cups and saucers spread around her in a circle, and the large china teapot in her hand. Yes, thank you," I said, bewildered. "I'm Tabitha, by the way. You didn't tell me your name." "I'm Michael. Mike Morris," I replied. "It's nice to meet you." "Do you take milk and sugar?" she asked politely. Just milk, please," I replied. "What do you mean we're in the void? How did we get here? Is there a way out?" "You do ask an awful lot of silly questions, Michael, if you don't mind my saying so," said the girl, handing me a cup and saucer. "Perhaps you've not been here long. What year is it now, may I ask?" "What year do you think it is?" I replied with unease. "I asked you first. Did no one ever teach you that it's rude to answer someone's question with a question of your own?" "I'm sorry," I said. "It's 2021. "Is it only 2021? exclaimed the girl. "I thought it must be much later than that by now. It only goes to show how much slower time moves here than in the real world. Would you like to be my friend?" "What year was it when you arrived here?" I asked. "What did I just say about manners?" the girl replied haughtily. "When I arrived here, it was 1911, if you must know." 1911? You've been here 110 years. Oh, are we dead? Is that what's going on? Are we in hell? "No, I already told you we're in the void. You really must learn to listen if we're to be friends," said Tabitha. Despite my head bursting with questions and the newfound fear growing inside me, there was something about the child's pursed lips that made me sit up straight and thank her profusely for the tea. "I shall let your impetuosity slide just this once," the girl said, reminding me distinctly of my great-aunt, "as I expect you are rather frightened. I know I certainly was to begin with." "This place doesn't frighten you any more?" I asked. "I've been here for 110 years. Why should I be frightened now? You will come to no harm here." "But what is this place? How did we get here?" "It doesn't do to ask too many questions about the nature of the void," said the child, "as I'm afraid you won't find many answers. The best you can do is learn to find peace. There are many things one can do here, which are impossible in the natural world. Look." Tabitha held out her hand, and a small silver tray of biscuits appeared. "Would you care for a macaroon, Mr. Morris?" Thank you very much," I said uncertainly, taking a bite. They're good. Very good." "Of course they are. Why would I create a bad macaroon when I can just as easily create an excellent one?" "How do you do it?" I asked. "Do you just—" I held out my hand and thought about those small glasses of apple juice you get at continental breakfasts, and sure enough, one appeared in my hand. "Apple juice?" I asked, offering it to the girl. "Not just this moment, thank you," she replied, not impolitely. Shrugging, I swallowed the juice in one small gulp, before attempting to whirl the glass out of existence again. "Just drop it once you're finished," said the girl. "It's a good indicator of which way's up and which way's down." I dropped it, and watched as it fell away at a strange angle into the unfathomable depths below. Correcting my position, a thought struck me. What if it lands on someone's head? What if it lands on someone's head? Oh, don't worry. One doesn't encounter too many people in the void, and most don't stay for long. And besides, it is quite impossible to feel pain here. I learnt that the first time I poured hot tea on my hand. So some people leave? I asked, hopefully. There was a pause. Tabitha looked somewhat forlorn. Most do within a few years, she said. Her youthful appearance was barely able to mask the centuries behind her eyes. She wiped away the threat of a tear. You oughtn't be too hasty to leave, she said. You have no way of knowing where you'll find yourself next. It might be much worse than here, and then you'd feel terribly foolish, wouldn't you? I'm sorry, I said with a pitying look. You must have been terrified, all alone here, so young. I know I was, and I'm 34. There was Mrs. Herndl. She was here when I arrived. She'd taught at a school and had children of her own, so was glad of the company of a girl, and I, of course, needed a mother. What happened to her? I asked. She left. She sipped her tea. So, has the war ended yet? She asked. Which war? The war with Iraq. The last Englishman who was here told me about it. Is it still going on? Sort of. It's quite complicated, I explained. Wars have changed a lot since your day. They're a lot messier now, in a way. You know about the world wars, I take it. Chapter and verse, Mr. Morris. Unless there's been a third one since I last heard. No, not yet, but we've come close a few times. And is Elizabeth still queen? She asked. Yes, she's still going, I replied. She's pretty old now, though. I was born a week after the passing of Queen Victoria, the girl said. Elizabeth must have reigned even longer than her by now. Yes, I think so, I said, although I wasn't in the least bit sure. It's funny. You were born into a different world from me. I doubt you'd even recognise it if you could go there today. Yet you know about so many things out of your time. When I arrived here, men had not long since managed to build working aircraft out of timber and canvas, and only a few decades later, the Americans used such machines to drop bombs capable of destroying whole cities. And recently, a war was started because someone flew an aeroplane into a building 100 stories high. I could have lived long enough to witness it all. Are we dead? I asked. Is this a dream? If this is a dream of yours, she began, then that means I'm not real. If we're both dead, then at least that means that at some point we were both alive. The truth is, I don't know. And neither can you or anyone else in the void. So please stop being so maudlin. I want to hear about what's going on in the world. Are people still using the what was it called? The World Wide Web? And so that's how I found myself here. We call it the void, for want of a better name. If you're lucky, you'll move on pretty quickly, although best to work on the assumption that you're here to stay. I know it's difficult, but please try to relax. Nothing's going to hurt you anymore. Now, let me make you a pint, and you can tell me all about what's been going on in the world.